Hello and welcome. My name is Leah Kopke. I'm a 3D motion design freelancer, and this is my 3D modeling podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. Today we are going through all the settings for the Connect object and some instances where you might find this to be a helpful tool to have in your toolbox inside of Cinema 4D. So we'll walk through all of that. Someone had requested in the comments for me to cover this tool, so I really do listen to you guys. If you are interested in knowing something that I haven't covered yet, a tool inside of Cinema 4D, please let me know. I'm always interested in hearing from you. Let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and get started. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D. I set up this animation, very simple animation, as an example, just to show how this tool works. Now, I'm sure you can apply this to your own projects and make something much more cool and much more advanced than this. But this is a good project file to just show what we can do here. You can see that we have this top that is going back on the cube. And I just grouped these together within a null. You can see I have the bottom named bottom and the top named top, pretty simple. And we have a thicken generator and a connect generator. Let's first of all show where you can find your generators and your connect in general. So right over here, if you hold a click on the subdivision surface, you'll find your connect in here. So that's where you can find it in the first place. The second place where you can find it is in the create menu under generator. You'll see connects right over here. So two great places where you can find it. You can also find the thicken in here. If you want to learn about the thicken generator, I will leave a link to that episode below. We cover all different kinds of 3D modeling tools in this podcast. So let's say we decide we want to place this group, the bottom and the top, within a thicken generator. So now we're adding thickness to this. And if I press play, you'll see that the corners don't match up when the lid comes down onto the box. What if we wanted it to look like it did before without the thicken, where the corners lined up nicely and it became one instead of having this little step here, like they come together as one form? And that's one situation where the connect would come in helpful, because basically what it does is it welds points together to create one object, but it also allows you to keep those separate at a different point. So if you're animating it, you can keep them separate as two different polygonal objects and then have them come together and weld as one. Whereas if you're just 3D modeling and you want to weld something together, you can use your usual tool. I'm using Shift-C to open up the manager. And in here, if I search weld, you'll see that we have this weld tool here. And this is grayed out because we don't have anything that we have started 3D modeling right now. But this tool is what you would typically use to weld just a 3D model, not thinking of, I want this to weld at a certain point in an animation. So that's where the connect is really helpful, is you can weld something together at a specific point in your animation. So now let's say we want that to happen here and we don't want that step. Let's try dropping our thicken with our, actually let's try dropping our group into the connect first, and then we'll drop the connect object into the thicken. So here the hierarchy is very important. First, we are connecting our two objects here and welding them together, and then it's taking that object and thickening it so that it has thickness along the edges there. And you'll see it looks a little bit different when I press play. it welds together at the corner. So now it just looks like it turned into a box, but you still get to have thickness at the beginning, and then it becomes one object. So that is one situation where the connect object is very helpful. But let's go ahead and talk about some of these settings in the connect object. So there's a couple different ways you can add objects to the connect. One way is you just put those objects within the hierarchy of the connect, and it will connect them or weld them together. The second option is you can keep these outside of the hierarchy, and then you can either use this eyedropper, or you can drag and drop the objects into this area that says objects, and it will recognize it. So I'll press play again. You can see it's still connecting. So there's two different ways to have it recognize the objects. You'll see you have this option here, weld. Now you don't always have to have things weld together. So you can see at the 60th frame, it welds together. If I turn this off, it will no longer weld. So there may be a situation where you just want to have two objects welded together in a group. Maybe you prefer using a generator instead of using the mesh modeling weld tool or something like that. There's all kinds of different situations. Maybe you found a situation where you just want them grouped together as an object. And it'll work a lot like if I press if I right click on this, you'll see that there's this connect objects tool, and it'll act a lot like this except in a generator form. It'll tell Cinema 4D to recognize the objects below it as one object, and sometimes that's helpful. You could also drop things into a null and it has a similar effect, but it will still be recognized as two objects within a hierarchy. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that you can also adjust the tolerance for the weld. So if you do decide you want to use the weld, which is what I usually use this tool for, you can adjust the tolerance. So right now our tolerance is on 0. So only when these points are exactly on top of each other, they will weld together. So if they're a little bit further away and I go back one frame, now we have this step formation at the corner. But if I increase our tolerance a little bit, now they weld together. So I'll move these further apart. This is the tolerance for at which point, what distance these need to be at before they're welded together. So you can increase this until they weld together. If you increase this really far, it'll just be continuously welding it together even as the two parts are animating, which might be a cool effect that you might want to get. And maybe you could use that for animation if you wanted to, instead of animating the individual points, which is another way you could approach this. You can use point level animation. That's actually this button down here on the right. We're not going in depth of that today, but I just want to do a thorough explanation of what you could do here for this situation. So that's your tolerance. I'm going to move this back to some small number. You have different FONG modes. Now, if you want to learn all about the FONG tag and what FONG is, I actually explained that in a whole other episode, so I'll leave a link to that in the description. You have manual, average, lowest, highest, and as breaks. So the first one is manual, and manual is choosing to use a FONG tag added to the connect object to control the FONG. So you can see it looks a little bit different now. And that's controlling the shading on the object. we can choose to use an angle limit. Now the shading looks a little bit nicer to me. You also have another option here, and this is the average. That will take the average limit used in these two Phong tags. So the objects that are being connected, it will take the average of the Phong angle here and the average of the Phong angle here, and use those to control how this looks. You could also choose the lowest. That will take whatever Phong angle has the lowest number, and it'll use that from the objects being connected, or you can choose the highest. In that case, it will take the highest Phong angle in the Phong tag of the objects that are being connected and use that for the shading on your object or the Phong. The last one is as breaks, and that will take into account any edge breaks you added. So that's one more option. So those are the options here for these. You also have the option to turn on textures. If you turn on textures, it will keep the object accurate to the textures you originally added to it. So let's go ahead and go into our asset browser and just look up some materials. I just want to add 2 different textures to here as an example. I'll add brick wall to this one, and to make it look different, I'll choose brass for this one. Since I have textures on, it is using the textures I applied to the bottom and the top. If I turn this off, it'll use a texture that you add to the connect. So you have control over that. You can also choose to use center axis. So let's go ahead and turn on the center axis. If I turn this on, you'll notice that the cube moves. If I turn off the connect and the thicken from being used right now, you'll see that this was the original location of the group and the bottom and the top. This is where they were. This is where their axes are. When I turn on connect and turn off this, you could see that the box actually moved to where the connect object's axis is rather than the original location of the group. So you can choose to use the center axis of that location, or you can use the location based on the center axis of the connect object. So that's what this here is controlling. So if you add things to the connect object and it moves it around and you don't like that, you can change it. And that is the last setting for the connect object for today. I hope you found this helpful. If you'd like to learn about more generators and how they work, I'm adding in a ton more episodes on generators. I may have already covered one you're interested in. I've covered the mesh modeling tools, many of the settings already for pyro, covered the settings for the pyro emitter, as well as many of the settings in your project settings for that, so you can check those out on my YouTube channel. And thank you so much for staying here. If you found this helpful, please give me a thumbs up. If there are any generators or deformers you're interested in me covering, or you just have any thoughts, please leave them in the comments below. And thank you so much. If you found this helpful and you want to be notified when the next episode comes out, please hit subscribe and ring the bell. See you again soon.